Hey neighbors, tax season is almost here. And did you know if your household earned less than $84,000 in 2025, you qualify to file your taxes at no cost through United Way's Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, or VITA program. Maximize your refunds and save on filing fees. Get free tax prep from United Way and keep more of what you earn. Visit UnitedWayFileFree.com to learn more.
Today on CityCast Nashville, is Nashville ready for a Super Bowl? On the morning after the big game, we break down what it would really take to bring the NFL's biggest event to Music City. And would hosting a Super Bowl actually be worth it? I'm joined by David Beauclair, digital producer at the Nashville Banner and longtime sports writer, to discuss stadium readiness, infrastructure concerns, and economic impact. It's Monday, February 9th. I'm your producer, Daniel Sumpstein, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Now that Super Bowl weekend is behind us, we want to look at what might be coming for our city. Governor Bill Lee has submitted a letter of interest to the NFL for Nashville to host the Super Bowl in 2029. Can you walk us through how the NFL's bidding and selection process actually works for these cities?
There's a semi-regular rotation. There are cities that, will get the Super Bowl every few years, Atlanta being one of them, LA, specifically Inglewood, California is one of them. South Florida tends to get them regularly. With Nashville, they're going to drop Nashville in there at some point. I don't think there's any question about that. It's a matter of working out when and the logistics right now. The next three Super Bowls are, this year we had Santa Clara. You've got Inglewood in 2027. You've got Atlanta in 2028. So the earliest it would be here is 2029. But there's stuff that goes into this that we don't even think about. I know for a fact that the NFL has had discussions, for example, already with the Metro Nashville Police Department over a specific force devoted to the Cumberland River and having people on boats and what is required with that. Obviously, you have to show the things that Nashville has addressed over the years in terms of the hotel rooms and the convention center space and all that. There's no question all of those things are in place and Nashville can handle it. I think it's just a question of, does Nashville get it in 2029? Does Nashville get it in 2030? It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
What other things does the NFL typically look for beyond the stadium itself?
Well, the stadium itself is a big deal now. It used to be, bigger was better in the stadiums. I mean, there have been Super Bowls that have attracted 100,000 or more, a little bit over 100,000. I think Super Bowl 14 is the best attended Super Bowl ever with just over that number. The new Nissan Stadium obviously is going to be around 60,000, but getting as many people in the building is not the issue that it once was because of, all the age of high-def television and streaming and all this. It's about the experience now because the stadium will be filled with big sponsors from the league. It'll be filled with players from other teams. It'll be filled with dignitaries and this and that. So I think it's all about making sure you have a modern stadium experience. And by all accounts, certainly the new Nissan Stadium will provide that, and even at a capacity of 60,000, I think the league is very comfortable with that. Las Vegas hosted it last year. It's just over 61,000. That number seems to be one that the league is very comfortable with at the moment.
Yeah, and we also saw that we were just named a host venue for the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. They're going to be playing their group stage soccer games right here at Geodis Park. What does that kind of tell you about Nashville's readiness for a giant sporting event?
I think the thing that changed everything for Nashville was the 2017 Stanley Cup Final when the Preds made their run. The town went crazy. People were everywhere. I'm certain that caught the attention of the NFL and helped bring the 2019 NFL draft here. You have to give Nashville SC and those folks over there credit. They didn't rush in terms of building Geodis Stadium. They took a year longer than they had originally planned because they took a step back and said, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. What they delivered was the largest soccer-specific stadium in the United States. And, we've seen the U.S. national women's team here. Nashville can host international soccer at that venue just fine. It'll be interesting to see how much of the Olympic atmosphere is in town when you're talking about Olympics that are actually in LA, but there will be matches here. That'll be really interesting. And of course, Japan's soccer team will be based here and training in Nashville throughout the course of the World Cup coming up too. So this is Nashville's evolution as a pro sports city, I think is pretty well complete at this point. And you see that Nashville is in on all of these things, these huge events as they're happening, whether specifically in this town or elsewhere in this country at the moment.
Let's get into numbers. How much of the cost of hosting a Super Bowl typically falls on local governments? And what kinds of public services tend to feel the strain most during Super Bowl week?
Yeah, there is cost associated with Super Bowl that people don't think about. A lot of times the NFL will demand certain upgrades to infrastructure, specifically roads. Public transportation is a big deal. And Nashville obviously doesn't have the most expansive public transportation system, so we'll see how that happens and what is required there in terms of additional bus routes or things. But of course, the ace in the hole that Nashville has is the downtown area is so well contained, and you can get from pretty much anywhere to anywhere fairly easily, and you can walk if you want. You have all the hotels down there. There is money that has to be spent up front beyond just the cost of building a stadium that is capable of hosting a Super Bowl. But there, by all accounts, there's a lot of money to be made too when you do get a Super Bowl in town.
Well, some independent economic impact studies suggest hosting a Super Bowl can add more than $100 million to a local economy, but some economists refute how the data is measured. What are the real economic benefits for Nashville and the surrounding communities, and which groups stand to gain the most?
Yeah, I'm not an economics expert, and I read some of those things too, and at points my eyes glaze over. I can tell you this. It was more than 30 years ago when Mike Tyson was sort of at the height of his powers. I was in Las Vegas on a heavyweight fight weekend when Mike Tyson was fighting Evander Holyfield, I think it was. It was one of those fights. And, everything you've heard about what Vegas is like on a big fight weekend, number one, is true. And number two, the Super Bowl week is the closest I have ever seen to something like that. This is a town that's used to having tourists here. There's no question about that. But the type of tourists and the density, and I'm talking big money spenders, it is remarkable. So what you're looking at is all the trendy restaurants and all the trendy nightclubs and event spaces. I mean, there are parties every night of the week, whether it's an NFL Players Association event, whether it's all the NFL's biggest sponsors, Budweiser will have something. There are things going on, and it's throughout the week. It starts Monday night, and it's almost by the time you get to Sunday, you're like, oh yeah, there's a game going on today. I mean, the waiters will pocket huge money in tips that week. The rideshare drivers, the limo companies, maybe even more so than the rideshare drivers. There's that whole aspect of it. Obviously, all the hotels will be filled. And when you talk about, is it worth it to spend $2.1 billion on a stadium? When you talk about the revenue bonds that Metro is using to fund their portion of the stadium, which is $760 million, that's coming from hotel tax and things like that. So the Super Bowl will automatically sort of start to pay off a big chunk of Metro's commitment to this stadium. So I think there will be real money in this town in a way that folks haven't seen before. If you just look at the NFL draft in 2019 that I referenced before, and we all remember how huge that was. The NFL had never seen anything like that with its draft before. The economic impact numbers on that compared to what they typically are for the Super Bowl. Super Bowl's 3 times larger in terms of an economic impact. So whatever the real numbers are, there's no question that the Super Bowl is much bigger, and it will be unlike anything this town has seen to date.
Well, we know that the draft also caused some headaches for residents. Do we anticipate that the Super Bowl will be like the same amount of headaches for residents?
I guess it depends on how much folks are trying to get downtown, and because it's not so much a public event, the Super Bowl is, as compared to the draft. Where the draft, it was, let's get as many people downtown as possible. And the way Broadway was blocked off, people were surprised they couldn't get to bars and things like that. I don't know that it'll be quite the same this time. I would assume most of the bars on Lower Broad, again, will be rented out for private parties, whether it's nightly or a couple nights a week at least. And I'm sure there will be some degree of fan experience, but the security that is involved in the Super Bowl and around the stadium area and around the convention center, it's a little different feel that way. It's not, hey, everybody come on in. I think for the most part, everyday Nashvillians will have to sort of just stay back and watch TV and experience it that way.
Well, how does this planning kind of intersect with some of the existing challenges we already have, like traffic congestion and emergency response capacity? I really want to touch on the emergency response. We've seen how vulnerable the city can be during emergencies with the recent storm that knocked out power for hundreds of thousands of residents here. So what else will need to be done there?
Again, the NFL is very clear in terms of what it requires. I know for the draft, there was a manual that was given to city leaders that was, a binder, however thick it was. It was told to me that, somebody had never seen anything that big and that detailed. And again, I assume the Super Bowl will be more, but the Super Bowl will, the NFL will also bring in their own security people, and there will be reviews done years in advance and leading up to the Super Bowl in terms of infrastructure stuff. There will be enhancements made to wireless capability. And in a lot of ways, Metro will take a back seat to NFL personnel and NFL entities and sort of ride shotgun in terms of what the NFL requires and what they'll do kind of on their own. As we know, it's this time of year, right? Like that sort of thing could happen. I was in Atlanta with the Titans in 1999, actually early 2000 for the Super Bowl, where they had an ice storm leading up to that, and downtown Atlanta was covered in ice. And I can tell you, it didn't matter. That everything went on as planned that week. And that was what, 26, 27 years ago. I would assume the NFL is even better at dealing with those sorts of situations now. There was, shuttle buses, like media shuttle buses, players buses, things. There are routes that are blocked off to get folks around that way. They kept people moving throughout downtown, even though the streets remained largely covered in ice at that point. So I would think if we were to have a situation similar to what we've just experienced in the last couple of weeks here, that the NFL folks probably wouldn't know it unless NES couldn't get the power restored to downtown hotels in time for folks.
We know that B&A can be a gridlock nightmare sometimes. Do we anticipate any work needing to be done there?
That's a really good question. I would think some accommodations will be made for shuttle buses because folks will be coming in big parties and folks will be all trying to get to specific hotels and whatnot, that maybe something could be done about that. But yeah, you're exactly right. When you talk about people coming in over a period of days, typical to what we see in a weekend here, that's a problem waiting to happen. Obviously the airport is expanding. That's not going to be done at that point. But again, this is why the NFL awards these things years in advance. And it's not like, okay, this Super Bowl's done. Where are we going next year? We'll talk about it in a couple months. We'll see. I mean, they work on the run up to these things years at a time and try and get these things all ironed out before it happens.
What lessons can we take from other host cities that have hosted Super Bowls in the past?
Nashville doesn't need to take a lesson from anybody when it comes to hosting a Super Bowl, right? And as I said, the NFL will tell you what the NFL needs. Other than that, Nashville needs to be Nashville. You're not going to go and say, well, Tootsie's, you need to put fresh paint on the wall and you need to make it look nicer down there, right? I mean, people will want the Tootsie's experience, and Nashville loves a party. Like I say, no one had ever seen a public response to the Stanley Cup final like Nashville. And now you see every year, deep into the NHL playoffs, teams are putting video boards outside their arenas when their team is away and hosting the parties similar to what Nashville did. No one had seen an NFL draft anything like what happened in 2019, and now everybody's trying to replicate what Nashville did. So I don't see Nashville as needing to say, wow, look at what LA did. If the stadium is done right, and all indications are the stadium's going to be done right, then I assume everything else will take care of itself.
I was down on Broadway during the Stanley Cup Finals, and there's just so much joy and excitement being shared by the people who are down there. And same with the NFL draft. Like, the amount of joy that people get from these sort of events, I think, is another contributing factor of why to host these sort of things. What do you think success would look like for Nashville if it hosted the Super Bowl? And how should residents measure whether it was worth it?
Just what you talked about, that everybody comes away with it saying, that was fun. Let's do it again, because it is a big event. It does require sacrifice from locals, because roads will be closed off, or roads that are typically two ways will be one way, and there'll be restaurants that you can't get to, and I mean there are these inconveniences for the local folks, but it is such a showcase event, and there's so much around it that I just think if everyone's like, yeah, that we did that well. That was fun. There's an optimism and an enthusiasm in this town that doesn't exist other places. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I love Philadelphia, but there's definitely a different attitude there about things, and people tend to expect the worst. That's not what happens here. So again, that's why I say Nashville doesn't need to take a backseat to anybody in these sorts of things. I assume there will be Nashville touches to it when it gets here, and hopefully it goes off without a hitch.
What would you say to someone who's not a huge fan of sports and thinks this is going to be their worst nightmare?
I certainly wouldn't diminish their take on things. It will be an inconvenience to them. And I have a colleague at the Nashville Banner who every couple weeks brings up his tax dollars going to fund this stadium that he has no interest in the team playing there or anything to do with that stadium, and he's disgusted about it. It's all part of the evolution of this city. It's we've seen what the convention center has done to downtown, and all the additions of the downtown hotels and the businesses. These are all things that happen with a city that is on the rise, that has been on the rise for a while. There's, the more things that take place in Nashville, the more likely somebody's not going to appreciate it fully. Okay, there are other things that go on that I don't appreciate. For 1 week in 2029 or 2030 or 2031, whenever it is, this is what's going to happen, and it's going to be part of living in Nashville going forward.
Will locals even be able to go to the game?
I mean, there will be some local folks there, but I don't even know if there's any sort of local ticket sales anymore. I would think that a large chunk, if not all of the tickets, are pretty much spoken for these days through sponsorship deals and other arrangements that you have. The best way for locals to go will be if you can afford to buy tickets on the secondary market, because they will be available there. They will be very pricey, obviously, but that's sadly, that is going to be the best option, really, for most folks, I think.
Yeah, it's such a corporate event, unfortunately.
It really is. And when you're in the stadium for a Super Bowl, it is funny because people just sort of cheer at moments. There's not that sense of, oh, you can hear all the fans of this team now because their team has some momentum. There's little pockets maybe, but it's from a fan atmosphere. Being in the stadium for a Super Bowl is different than anything else you've really ever experienced.
I guess the only question left to ask is, if Nashville hosts a Super Bowl, who should perform at the halftime show?
I would assume that the NFL would automatically gravitate toward country music. If NBC is broadcasting the game that year, certainly Carrie Underwood seems like a no-brainer for something like that. I would assume Garth Brooks would be at the head of the line trying to get that gig too. What I would like to see personally, though, is something that's reflective of Nashville as Music City, USA, and not just the perception people have of Nashville and country music. So, I'd like to see sort of this lineup of maybe Garth Brooks performs and then Jack White performs and maybe something pop like the band Camino, or, there's certainly no shortage of acts and artists you could choose from. And, again, to do something uniquely Nashville that might surprise people a little bit. I think if you could do sort of a Music City review, so to speak, with some of the biggest names here in town, I think that would be tremendous.
And then have Dolly close it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Taylor Swift. Marie would be stoked.
Exactly.
Yeah. David, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Nashville listeners, hopefully this has been helpful to influence whether you think we're ready for the Super Bowl or not. And yeah, time will tell. We've got a lot of time to plan for this thing. So
that's right. It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And don't forget, you can support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our CityCast Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Later.